a fortune from streaming pornography and downloading pornography into cell phones. You are now going to be happy to know that you can sit on a train or a bus while some guy is jerking off to his favourite pornography through his cell phone. This is the future. Example, Richard Branson, who owns Virgin, all that Virgin Empire, he recently made a deal with Playboy to develop hardcore pornography films to stream into British cell phones. You cannot go to a cell phone conference today without there being major booths given over to the pornographers. Pornography and technological development go hand in hand. So that is one reason why we're in the situation we're in today. The other reason, which is really crucial, is pop culture. Next slide. You all know that this is every speaker's nightmare, don't you, when the slides don't work accordingly? Right. So let's look at this hideous picture. She's hideous, he's hideous, but let's talk about how this works. Now, we have this mantra about stereotypes. Now, we know that stereotypes are not necessarily true. In fact, very rarely are they true. That's not their power. The power of stereotypes does not lie in their truth. It lies in their ability to police the behaviour of those who identify with the stereotypes. That's its power. And it also lies in the ability of the oppressor class to judge the oppressor by the stereotypes. These are stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. However hideous each one is, on some level, most women look at these images and compare themselves to that woman. Now let's talk about what it means to live in an image-based culture. Anyone over the age of 35 in this room was brought up in what we can call more a print-based culture, where the dominant form of communication was the printed word. Now those of you in your mid to late 20s got hit with the image-based culture, which is really about the MTV generation coming of age. Now let's think about what this means to live in a society dominated by the image. When you look at print and you see something, you can think to yourself, I agree or disagree. You can put it down and come back. You engage with it. However, the problem with image is we have no such immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the image. You look at that and you don't engage with it. You immediately think, oh my God, I'm such a fat pig. Look at me compared to her. What's wrong with me? My students do this all the time. And I have to tell you, I know how images work. I understand how Cosmopolitan works. I understand how it constructs femininity to pull you in so you'll spend money. And I look at Cosmopolitan and I see myself going, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I want to look like this, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. On some level, it captures you, because ideology is like clay. You throw it and it sticks. On some people it sticks more, on some people it sticks less. But stick it usually does. And that's the role of images, is to construct your identity in relation to what is normalized. Now remember, the bizarre thing about media is it makes normal the abnormal and makes abnormal the normal. Because look around you, look at the women's bodies in this room. Every single woman's body really makes sense in her own terms. But look at the images. Next one. All right, enough for him. Thank you. Right, this is an abnormal image of a woman. Size 2, blonde, white, perfectly toned, and of course airbrushed, because trust me, Jessica Simpson does not look like this either. But nevertheless, in this culture, we can't help but identify with it. And by the way, I use Jessica Simpson because she has become the laughingstock, one of the many laughingstocks of American media. And we often as women join in. And do you know that we laugh at her, we laugh at ourselves. Because they laugh at her because she's blonde, forget it. It's because she's a woman. And you have every generation the blonde bimbo. My generation's was Meg Ryan, the other one was Goldie Hawn. And this says something about the women as in their essence. It's not just about that one particular woman. The problem with being part of an oppressed group is that the stereotype tends to make generalizations about everybody in that group. And those of the oppressor class believe them. So we see the next example. And the next. And so what do you get? Woman after woman, blonde, white, size 2, and look at the image on her face. Now let's talk about media theory. And there is a concept in media theory called the reader inscribed in the text, or the presumed spectator. To make that more apparent to you, Who is the presumed spectator? And before you answer that, tell me, is she speaking to her mother saying, let's go for a cup of coffee after the photo shoot? No. She's speaking to the presumed spectator, who of course is male, and what she's saying is very clear. Fuck me. Now this is called the come on look in media theory. I prefer the fuck me look because it makes it more succinct, because that's what it is. Now there's a problem with this. The problem is that males in our culture are socialised in a society where they are bombarded with the fuck me look, where it offers visual entitlement to ownership of women's bodies. And what is rape and sexual assault if not taking men up on that offer that she's offering? The only trouble is she's not walking down the street, we are. And so this has tremendous implications. So when Madonna, in her feminist way, right, goes out and talks about women and puts out the message that women are indeed exactly as men thought they are, and pornographic men, it's all right for Madonna to say that, because you know why? She travels with big, beefy guys who protect her. It's you and I walking in that fucking parking lot at night that has to deal with the guys who believe this. So that's the problem. When women talk about their choices, is every single one of us suffers on some level. Now, another example, next one please. Now, this is a really interesting picture, and I have to mention my husband here, because the first time I bought this, he looked at it and said, it's all the same woman, why have they got the same woman? And I said, no, it's not. He said, yes, look. Well, in a way, he was right, because we are all the same in images. We have no history, we have no needs, no wants, no idiosyncrasies, nothing, no goals for the future, no background. We're all just a pair of nice legs, a pair of toned thighs, a pair of good-sized breasts. We all just become the same. Each one is as good as the next, as long as, of course, you conform to some very basic standard of what you should look like as a woman. Unless, of course, next one, you happen to be a woman of colour. Then, of course, the whole beauty standard shifts. Now, we're living increasingly in a society where the beauty standard has not only got whiter, it's gotten blonder. Look at this new crop of stars, from Kate Hudson to Scarlett Johansson. You can go right through them, and you can see the blondness, it's glaring out at you. Now, what you see increasingly is the way that women of colour, especially black women, are represented in this society is either very dark or very light. And also, what was interesting last year at the Oscars is how many women and men of colour you see who are in the entertaining singing and dancing roles. How many dramatic good parts are denied women of colour and men of colour. Now, so you have this where, of course, she's in an animal skin, and the next one is even more clear. Now, where did this come from? This is a direct outgrowth of the racist ideology developed in slavery that legitimised the wholesale rape of black women. You see, these good Christian men couldn't resist these animalistic black women. And in the face of such overt sexuality, what could they do? And this is the kind of image you see over and over again in a jungle with animal prints. Now, this is a very good example. This is last year's Sports Illustrated. Now, virtually every image in Sports Illustrated last year was on a beach. A white woman on a beach having a wonderful time, I might add, all by herself. Except this one. This was the only woman of colour, and they moved the entire photo shoot from the beach to what looks like a jungle setting, and then, if we miss it, if we're stupid, they put a tiger in there to really tell us. Right? And this is 2006, last year, and yet we still have these racist images over and over again. And I think Byron really talked about it last night, well, how what this is about white images of black imagery. Now let's talk about that. When we talk about race, we focus on people of colour. Actually, if you want to think about race and you want to look at stereotypes of African Americans, the stereotypes of African Americans tell us nothing about African Americans, but they tell us a whole lot about the white racist imagination. It's exactly the same with pornography. You know, it took me a few years to realise what was going on, because I'd get picked up at the airport by students when I was going into lecture, and they'd say, you know, we're really happy you're coming to talk about women's issues. And I think, you know, men make pornography, men jerk off to it, men get rich from it. Where the fuck is the woman in all of this, right? And the reality is, we think it's about women because it's a picture of women. But no, pornography is really the story of masculinity. Pornography is the place where men speak to each other using the female body as their screen to project their words and their images. This is not about us. We, however, pay the enormous price for this. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about what's going on in popular culture. Now, for many of you who are teachers, excuse me 1 minute. It's amazing I can get worked up by these after 20 years, isn't it? Okay, all right. For those of you, next slide please. For those of you who teach, you'll probably find it's getting harder and harder to talk about pornography and sexism to students the younger they are. This is because they live in a very different world to you and I. Second wave feminism was about resistance, at best, and at worst, negotiation with patriarchy. Third wave is about capitulation. And I often say, and I hate to be glib, but I think much of the third wave feminism is the thinking woman's cosmopolitan. Very, very similar. Let's talk about what's going on in the culture. Let's talk about the move towards what I would call, of course in quotes, slut culture. From Lindsay to Christina to Brittany. There's more, but we'll stop here for a minute. Now, why do I say slut culture? To explain that, I'm going to explain the title of my new book, which hopefully will be coming out soon if someone will publish it. That's a whole other story. And it's going to be called Stepford Sluts. Now, you can all guess why. Because, of course, last year they did a new Stepford Wife. Did anyone see it with Nicole Kidman? Hideous, hideous movie, right? And the first one was a really good, insightful analysis of women's lives. Now, of course, the film was completely bombed. Nobody went to see it for a number of reasons. My main understanding is it was a ridiculous movie to make in 2006. Why? Because the ideal woman is indeed on her hands and knees, but she ain't cleaning any kitchen floors on her hands and knees. The ideal woman constructed in patriarchy, is no longer a Stepford wife, it's a Stepford slut. Equally robotic, equally capitulating, equally mindless and brainless, and equally distressed internally. But you still have to create that image. Now, who better than Britney Spears to talk about? A kid who was back, please. You're taking my thunder here. Let's talk about this kid's life, right? She was pulled out as a kid from a working class home, fronted by her parents. Her first major director for her videos when she was, I think, 14, was a man called Gregory Dark, who was, surprise, surprise, a porn director. She had to fire him when it became public. Then, of course, she became too old and washed up because she turned 20. Which of course is old. Then they have harassed and followed this poor woman around endlessly. And of course the subtext of all of this is, listen honey, you're white trash. You might be rich, but you're white trash and you deserve to go back to where you belong. Do you remember when she was photographed with her child saying she fell and she did all these things? Do you remember this? They were following her. Is there a mother here who has not made mistakes? Right? But we are somehow meant to be, or this poor woman was meant to be the perfect mother. And of course now these stories about her decompensating are just awful. And this is what they do to women in the media. They give them stardom for a few years and then they spit them out. As in, the next one, Paris Hilton. Now, here's a woman who had a little reputation and a big bank account before her boyfriend, of course, released the sex movie, onto the internet. He has since said that she was drunk most of the time they had sex. And of course, no one's saying, how dare you do this? And then she became a megastar overnight. For most of you older in this room, think about, in our generation, if a woman would have been photographed having sex, she would have gone into hiding. It would have been the end of her career. And what happens in this culture? We absolutely elevate it. Not her, but the representations of her. She now, of course, has been pulled over for drunk driving another couple of times. Another woman who, again, is going to be spit out by the culture. Next one. Probably the saddest of all. Right, the saddest of all. They said they're going to release the autopsy results of how she died, Anna Nicole Smith and how she died. Let me tell you, they don't need to do an autopsy. I know what this woman died of. She died of a broken heart. She buried her son 4 days after she gave birth. Now, this really stuck with me, and I'll tell you why. Her son was the same age as my son. And so when you have a son, same age, it's devastating when you think of the pain. And then, when it came out that he had,